109 players, 206 men and 103 women are here for the 2023 Fide World Cup. It's the premier knockout tournament in over-the-board chess. All of these players have one goal: to become a candidate for the World Championship. Only 3 players in each tournament will earn this distinction. The winners will also earn a combined 160 grand in US dollars. Not bad. Yanchishtov Duda, the reigning World Cup winner, is back to try and repeat as champion, a feat no one has ever achieved in this grueling tournament.
And Jan-Christoph Duda wins the 2021 Fide World Cup. What a performance.
The top seeds in 2023 are Magnus Carlsen and Zhu Wenjun. Neither of them have won a World Cup before. Yes, even Magnus has yet to make it past the semis. It's that tough of a tournament. Still, Carlsen is the favorite in pretty much any tournament he plays. But don't sleep on the rest of this field. Hikaru Nakamura, Fabiano Caruana, Jan Nepomniachtchi. They're all here to try and win their first World Cup. For its part, the women's field boasts 5 world champions. Will one of them take the next step in a return to the throne? In a knockout like this, it is truly anyone's game. Who will come out on top? Who else will qualify for the candidates? What upsets are in store? This is the 2023 Fide World Cup.
Okay, it's been a very uneventful 24 hours, and those uneventful 24 hours were preceded by a ridiculously eventful 6 hours, and we will get another ridiculously eventful 6 hours here at the 2023 Fide World Cup as we take a look at the beautiful playing hall in the capital of Azerbaijan, a chess city, if there ever was one. Baku will be the site of the second game of the 4th round of the World Cup, and what a momentous round this is going to be. Peter, I think that this round can probably commentate itself. We could probably go on mute the whole time, and people will be entertained, but we have to do our job, and we will do our job to the best of our abilities. GM Daniel Naroditsky and GM Peter Leko bringing you coverage of what promises to be one of the all-time most interesting rounds, I think, in World Cup history.
Yeah, hello, Danya. Hello, everyone. Absolutely agreed. I mean, Magnus Carlsen needs to bounce back after yesterday's shocking defeat against VINCENT KEYMER, but we had so many ups and downs. Wesley So also losing against Alexei Sarana, and they're just basically the beginning of all the incredible things that we have witnessed yesterday.
We are so spoiled by the amount of interesting matchups. You pointed out Vincent KEYMER, one of the best games in his chess career, both from the sportive perspective of defeating Carlsen and also in the way that he did it. As we look at Magnus Carlsen's bracket, where he has met his ultimate match at the hands of an incredibly on-form Vincent KEYMER, whose previous results should not be ignored. He defeats Amin Tabatabai, who has the same rating with a score of 2-0. Before that, he defeated the Belgian stalwart Daniel Darda. And what's even more impressive, Peter, Magnus Carlsen has shown excellent form before yesterday's game. It looked like he had the upper hand yesterday, and then in the span of 10 minutes, everything changed.
Yeah, first Vincent equalized with this stunning tactic with knight takes d5. It was unbelievable that thanks to such tactic you can equalize the game. Usually that tactic might win you the game, but there he was under pressure, and I think he was relieved, very relieved. And then Magnus not being happy that the game ends in a draw, he was not sure what to play for, and then suddenly got outplayed by Vincent.
An exquisite endgame technique to finish it all off. Well, Magnus Carlsen, not the only big name in the World Cup. We also have some guy named Hikaru Nakamura, who also has his hands full with a difficult matchup. Folks, please join us in congratulating Pragnananda, who turns 18 today. A very warm, happy birthday to the Indian phenom, a big occasion, so much that he has achieved in the first 18 years of his life. But will he also achieve a victory over Hikaru Nakamura on this momentous day? Will he send this match to tie breaks? He has the white pieces, Peter. He was in the driver's seat for most of yesterday's game. He handled the most difficult part of the game with a lot of grace and a lot of maturity because it seemed like Hikaru was taking it over. But in the end, a draw, very fair result. And I think that this match is really going to come down to 1 or 2 individual critical moments.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that game was very high quality. It was a very intense fight. Prague got a fantastic opening, had everything under control, but Hikaru being Hikaru was looking for chances. He was patiently waiting, and when he got a chance, he used it, he jumped on it. Then in time table, it looked like Hikaru will finally prevail, but just one careful move, which was so natural, so human, to make, basically give Prague the chance to play a couple of very precise moves, make a draw. And I agree that it's going to be a very tough battle. There is one psychological issue. I mean, playing such a big game against Hikaru on your birthday, I hope that it will not affect Prague in any way, because we know exactly that chess players are usually not happy if they get some positive or negative emotions. Of course, with the birthday, everybody celebrates you and so on, but you have to focus on the game.
Absolutely. The mood is going to be celebratory among his family, but I think Prague could not care less, to be completely honest. He only cares about the result of this game, and he can worry about selecting his birthday cake and blowing out the candles after the game. And obviously, there are so many other interesting matchups, not all of which we paid enough heed to yesterday because the Magnus and Hikaru games were so interesting. We have Fabiano Caruana, who drew Ray Robson, and another big matchup, Nihal Sarin against Jan Nepomniachtchi. Great opening prep by Jan, but even better neutralization in the middle game by Nihal Sarin. Nihal with the white piece is very dangerous. That is one to watch, Peter, as well.
Yeah, there is so much to watch. It's just insane what we are spoiled with action. Unfortunately, we cannot do justice to all the participants. There is also this fantastic matchup between Daniel Vocaturo against Salem Saleh. A very big match, basically both players playing tournament of their life, and both of them have the chance to qualify for the 5th round.
Indeed, and also in the women's section, we saw the current women's world champion Zhu Wenjun, who's had a very tough ride at the World Cup, barely squeezing out that miracle victory in her previous match and drawing her first game yesterday against Elizabeth Potts with white. So she's got her work cut out for her, as does Alexandra Guryachkina. Man, wherever you look, you've got fascinating matchups, as well as some players who are having, as you said, Peter, the World Cup of their lives, including your compatriot Ferenc Berkish, who defeats Ruslan Ponomarev, who himself knocked out Lai Kwang Liam. So you've got layers upon layers of different players who are in amazing form, and then defeating other players who are also in great form. Of course, Alexis Sarana with the black pieces crushes Wesley So in one-sided fashion. He will try to round off this incredible upset with the white pieces today. But the nerves in that playing hall are something to watch.
Yeah, it's the second day of the 4th round. Yeah, it's all tension, all eyes on the players. Basically, one mistake can cost direct elimination, direct exit from the World Cup. No one wants to be in that shoe, and we do see Fabiano Caruana with the white pieces. He rather smoothly drew his game yesterday. With the black pieces, I think he's kind of confident that, yes, this is the day. But Ray has been super convincing. I have been with Vincent at the tournament in Prague, and that tournament was won by Ray Robson with a very convincing performance, very mature play, and it's not going to be easy for Fabi.
It certainly will not be. There are the two American superstars, Ray flirting with 2,700 in his last couple of tournaments, known for his stellar opening preparation. Of course, both of these players are. So the first stage of the game in Caruana Robson, I think, is going to be a classic. I'm so excited to see what kinds of openings we are going to see, and what we're going to see, of course, from Magnus Carlsen, because let's be real, that is our main focus today. Will Magnus be able to recover and bounce back with a victory to force tiebreaks against Vincent KEYMER? What a surprise that Magnus not yet at his board. He usually likes to come either 5 seconds before or 5 seconds after. Will he be freshly showered this time, Peter? When I lose a painful game, it can be a little bit difficult to get out of bed, much less take the shower. But Magnus, he's been through so much. He's used to adversity. He knows how to handle these kinds of situations. And I'm excited to see what kind of Magnus Carlsen will show up to the board today.
Yeah, for sure. We are all eagerly waiting for his first move. It's a must-win situation. It's so difficult to even imagine Magnus can play anything. But there is this kind of catch-22 situation, yeah, that you don't know exactly. You would like to be aggressive in a must-win game, but if you are aggressive, there is a chance that you run into some forced lines. and your opponent can show brilliant preparation. So there is the argument that in order to try to win, you should just play a very long game, and there is a handshake between Pragg and Hikaru, and the game is on.
Okay, and as I predicted, Magnus Carlsen shows up exactly 5 seconds after the game begins, puts down his water bottle, takes a sip of the other one, and the big moment. What will we see from Magnus on the first move? Anything is possible, from e4 to d4 to c4 to something offbeat like b3. Nothing can be ruled out. Anything can come from the laboratory, the feared laboratory of Magnus Carlsen. That opening kitchen has produced so many finds, so many dangerous weapons over the years. And yesterday, Magnus played an excellent opening. He got exactly what he wanted, and his loss could not have been further removed from what happened in the opening. But definitely, as usual, Magnus not in a hurry to make the first move.
Yeah, and Vincent was kind of staring at him for 1 or 2 seconds. And Magnus again does the Jadoubing story. Yeah, it almost looked like he touches the c pawn or yeah, something on the queen side, but not yet.
He pump faked us. Okay, that's more like it. I believe that is 1 e4 from Carlsen. Vincent responding with e5. And the second question, Rui Lopez, Italian, Scotch, Ponciani. What are we going to see?
Well, I'm basically expecting a Spanish most probably. But you never know. I mean, Magnus can play anything.
Yes, great call, Peter. It is a Spanish.
It's a Spanish, yeah. Now the big question, which line of the Spanish, yeah? Usually Vincent had been playing the Marshall, which is very much Magnus's territory.
Knight f6. And we've seen the deferred exchange in another matchup, bishop takes c6 in this line. We've seen a lot of d3. And I believe that is, in fact, d3. This has been very fashionable, Peter, in this tournament. I think d3 has outweighed castle short in popularity in the World Cup. And Magnus, following the trend there, the early d3 line can no longer be called, I think, rightfully a sideline. It is on par, I think, with castle short as the main line.
Yeah, but it's a little bit surprising because Vincent is the one who usually plays after castles, bishop e7, he's not opting for the open Spanish with knight takes e4. Yeah, and usually there's this argument that this case then white castles, and after bishop e7 plays the move d3, and black has committed the move bishop e7. Yeah, that's kind of the usual wisdom, because if you do play the move d3 immediately, then black can eventually also go for b5, bishop b3, and bishop c5, which is a very ambitious way of meeting any d3 kind of move orders.
Yeah, I've heard that b5, bishop c5, and this word is in major air quotes, the way to try to punish white for playing the early d3. Of course, this is another ploy by Magnus, because now he tosses the ball in Vincent's court, and Vincent has to start thinking, okay, does Magnus have something prepped against b5, bishop c5? And my guess would be that Vincent probably will go d6 if he fears something from Magnus's laboratory against the most ambitious continuation.
Yeah, well, Lord, there is also the other move which I actually like to play a lot here is bishop c5 immediately, not committing the b5 move yet, and waiting for white to show his card. If he plays c3, then black can still switch to b5, but basically the move order with bishop c5 aims to discourage the idea that white often uses after bishop c5 to go for some knight c3, knight d5 plan without playing short castle. Yeah, that's kind of the move of the trick, and bishop c5 on the board.
Carry on, Peter. You're on a roll, and I think we should show for players who aren't experienced with the Rui Lopez why bishop takes c6 and knight takes e5 fails. This is often the elephant in the room, and the reason, of course, is that after dc knight takes e5, there is the very nasty move queen to d4. Forking the knight on e5 and the pawn on f2. White can try to recover the piece, but he will lose a bunch of pawns, including the g2 pawn in the process. So that's out of the question. Magnus developing his dark squared bishop to g5, which is one of many different setups that you can choose. You can play lines with bishop g5. You can keep the bishop on c1. You can bring it out to e3. And bishop g5, Peter, has always struck me as a very principled, very ambitious way of handling this position, trying to play for maximum in terms of your minor piece development.
Yes, it's a very interesting move. I mean, especially for the fact that I'm not entirely familiar with this. I'm not a big fan of bishop g5 from the white side, and I don't exactly understand why this is the moment which makes it more attractive than in any other circumstances. But clearly, Magnus knows that he's in a must-win situation. He wants to disbalance Vincent as quickly as possible, and I think that's exactly the main purpose of bishop g5.
We have a big piece of news really quickly. Ju and June and Elizabeth Potts, the matchup we mentioned, riveting action in that game. We have a line that I personally have never seen before. This is a momentous novelty. In fact, the editors at New in Chess Yearbook have already phoned in and called this the novelty of the year. We have a position in the Berlin with queens on d4 and e6. I'm kidding, of course. Ju and June and Elizabeth Potts are about to make a Berlin draw, which is a very interesting decision by Lizzie, who doesn't exploit her white collar and is okay with forcing tie breaks here. Now, Ju and June has not yet acceded to the repetition with queen d6. She hasn't played that move yet. But Peter, the alternative here, which is bishop d7, is extremely unappetizing. Black is flat out worse, and there is no universe in which Ju and June goes for that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, basically, it's white to decide. If white goes for this drawish line with repetition, then black should simply repeat, because there is no right for black to play for a win.
And there it is.
And yeah.
Okay, some technicalities there, but both players are more than ready to go home. A little bit of eye contact, and Lizzie looks at Ju and June, says, all right, let's go for an early lunch. Let's get ready for the tie breaks. And there is the hand. Well, not yet. A little bit of technicality there, but there's the handshake, and there's the draw.
Yes, I mean, basically the players repeated 4 times just to make sure that they have all the right to shake hands. Yeah, it's a match strategy. I mean, basically, since Elizabeth Petz managed to make a draw with the black pieces, this gave her the comfort. Yeah, she gives up the white pieces. On the other hand, now the players are reaching the time trouble, I mean, the tie break. And probably Lizzie believes that in a fast time control, she will have better chances, creating practical chances against Ju and June's fantastic opening preparation.
It's definitely not, I think, not a bad strategy. Anything can happen in the tie breaks. And as the lower rated player, I think you give yourself pretty good chances by forcing the rapid mini match. But in any case, the score in their match is 1-1. Both games were drawn, and we will keep a close eye on their rapid match tomorrow. But back we go to our marquee matchup in the open section. Vincent KEYMER continues to ponder the situation after this, I don't know if I should call it rare, but perhaps somewhat more uncommon instance in which bishop g5 is played. There's a lot of options here. For black, you can play d6. You need to decide when to play b7, b5. I also see the bishop returning to e7 a lot of times, but here I think white can, in fact, take on c6 and take on e5. So that might be out of the question. But h6, another button that you can press at any moment.
Yes, I mean, basically it's very tempting always to include the moves h6. Yeah, h6 played. White clearly will fall back with the bishop to h4. That's the whole purpose of bishop g5, keeping things as complicated as possible. And since Vincent was hesitating before h6, I might have the feeling that he will still be a little bit hesitant, because he has to make up his mind. Does he play the move g5 already now, or does he start with d6? As you mentioned, all these b5 moves, which you can include at various moments. I feel like Vincent will postpone his decision, and this also gives us the chance to move maybe a little bit around, take a look at other games.
Absolutely. This is a very complicated strategic decision that Vincent will have to make. We expect him to invest some time. And indeed, we should go to our birthday boy matchup. Once again, happy 18th birthday to Prague, as he faces one of the toughest challenges of his young chess career, a game with Hikaru Nakamura. He's got white, and he has opted, I think, for the English opening. What a position we have on the board. There is a white pawn on g4. When did it appear on g4? Well, let's find out.
Yes, when and how and why. We do see that it was c4. Yesterday, Hikaru played the move c4 against Prague, and what amazes me in Prague's situation that he can play already any first move. He's so universal in his openings. It also shows that he works on chess amazing amount of times. Otherwise, you are simply not able to be inside all the positions. Just as we speak about Magnus, that this is his very big strength, I feel like also Pragg is becoming an absolute top 10 player opening wise.
Without question. And he chooses the 4 knights English with G3. There are many moves in that position. The classical line is E3. He plays G3, and Hikaru responds with a very interesting line that's been around for a while. He doesn't play D5, which would transpose the game into what can be thought of as a reverse Sicilian. Instead, he opts for knight C6 to D4. And for players who are less experienced in the English, this might catch you by surprise. It seems to blunder upon. And a little moment of levity, Peter, I cannot resist. We have to show that knight takes c5 runs into the move queen e7. And woe betide the player who drops the knight back to d3. And, well, fill in the blank, folks. Pause the video. Yeah, knight f3 checkmate is a very common pattern that everybody and their brother should be aware of. So instead of knight takes c5, Pragg continues with his development. He plays the normal bishop g2. The knights are traded on f3. Hikaru continues his minor piece development by placing the bishop on b4, as it's very standard in a lot of these English lines. And here's the etymology of the pawn on g4. This is when Pragg advances it from g3 to g4. Peter, what a move, and not one that you see commonly in the English.
Yes, what a move, and also blitzed out. Look at the clock situation. I mean, Pragg hasn't spent any time at all so far on the position. As you called it, Hikaru usually plays the d5 setup instead of knight d4. Nevertheless, Pragg is perfectly prepared. I mean, you don't come up with a move like g4 over the board, or you can come up, but then you spend at least like 15-20 minutes before you do that. If we see that g4 had been blitzed out, then there is a real purpose behind it. g4, h6, d3, c6, queen b3 on the board, and we reach the current position.
Okay, so there's stuff going on here on both sides of the board. Currently, the bishop is hanging, so Hikaru deciding whether to move the bishop, and if so, where. He can move it to c5, he can drop it back to a5, which I think is the most natural move. Of course, he can support the bishop. He can play a7, a5, and try to induce the move a3. I think if you're moving the bishop back to c5, it actually makes sense to throw in a5, a3, because then the bishop will have the a7 retreat square in the event, let's say, of the knight jumping to a4. Of course, there's a positional drawback in the sense that you weaken the b6 square, but there we get into really, subtle nuances. There's also a lot going on the king side, and I would imagine that Pragg will want to accumulate the pressure with h4 and g5, but perhaps we will play g5 immediately without h4, Peter. What do you make of the action on both sides of the board here?
Yeah, it's a very intriguing position, and I fully understand Hikaru why he spends a lot of time. And I have the feeling that he isn't comfortable. The reason that I have this feeling that simply after g3, I'm pretty sure that Hikaru was considering that, okay, so the reason why Pragg is playing this opening, because he wants to force me into this line, which actually Hikaru has tons of experience. He has played this main classical line millions of times, I believe, with white, with black. Nevertheless, he felt like Pragg might have something special prepared, and instead he opts for knight d4, which I can't really recall Hikaru being an expert. And suddenly, knight d4 has this tendency of having a very solid, slow strategical battle, and suddenly Pragg surprises Hikaru, blitzes out g4, and there is everything but no solidity in the position.
And I have something pretty incredible to share, Peter. What a small world it is. G4 has been played exactly once in the database. And for context, there are hundreds of games in the position before move 7. It was played by Aryan Tari against a Wonder Liang in a Pro Chess League match between the Canada Chess Bras and Charlotte Cobras. I was playing that match and keeping an eye on this game because a Wonder was on my team. And I remember watching this game and thinking how crazy it is. A Wonder crushed Aryan Tari in style, and now I remember that I did pay attention to this very weird opening. It looked like a pretty good position for Aryan, but then he blundered a tactic. So that is the only occurrence of that game, and I was essentially, of course, the game was played online, but I was there to virtually witness it.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because g4 if we would not know that white has actually spent the time on g3, then one could argue that somehow white has gained the tempo in this last couple of moves, because he has a better development. Now also the queen came with the tempo, hitting the bishop on b4. Black has to make a move, and Hikaru falls back with the bishop all the way to e7, which means that he was somehow concerned of some direct g4, g5 ideas as well.
That's a great point. He's trying to take the sting out of the move g5, which is still possible. I can play it, but then after the trade, there will be no pin against the knight, and Hikaru can proceed with the business of developing, perhaps with d7, d6. So there's a case to be made for white to delay the move g5 and either play h4 or develop his own bishop, let's say, to e3, and just kind of keep all of his options open.
Yes, and another important point is that with bishop e7, thus he signals that after h4, he might have some... I mean, first of all, the bishop is doing excellent job on this diagonal. Eventually, if white pushes g4, g5, then his pawn will be vulnerable. I'm guessing that black would just play a move like d6, and eventually black will get this idea of knight d7, knight c5 regrouping, hitting the queen, getting an essential tempo in order to reach that e6 square, which would be so lovely for black knight, protecting the g5 square, or would attack the pawn on g5 and also eyeing some knight d4. So I would say that Hikaru's bishop e7 was a very, very high-class prophylactic move.
Wow, bishop e7. I think Hikaru has such a great sense of when to play cautiously and when to play ambitiously. That's just a category of decision-making that's not talked about frequently. And I like this decision. First impressions are positive from the move bishop e7, even if it's strictly speaking not the top engine line. And I would be shocked if Pragg has prepared this move. If this was in his file, it really feels like bishop c5 and bishop a5 have to be the principled moves that Pragg focused on. And early indicators are that he is taking a little bit of time here. Now, is he taking that time to remember what was in his file, or is he taking that time because he is indeed out of his prep? Peter, what is your intuition on this question?
My intuition says that he's out of book, because it's just simply impossible to know everywhere everything. He could have never expected this line to happen. And it was already impressive that he had this idea. He knew that this g4, d3, queen b3 is a very interesting fighting idea. It also shows that he's extremely ambitious. He does not fear Hikaru at all. He wants to challenge him to an open fight. And that's why we will be in for a fantastic match.
Indeed, we will be. And I think as Pragg ponders his important next move, perhaps we should continue going around the horn. And I want to point out one game that is not going in the direction of the player who needs to win, and that is Wesley So, who faces the barrel of a 1-point deficit against Caruana. And early indicators are that this game is already going essentially out of control for Wesley, who needs to win with black. This is essentially a disaster scenario where Wesley has to take on e5 in this position and get an opposite colored bishop position, which I could not conceive of black winning realistically.
Yes, I mean, the problem of losing with white means that you have to win on demand with the black pieces. And Alexei Sarana is known to be a fantastic 1d4 player. I mean, he has also very sharp openings, he has very big opening knowledge, and he has very wide range of opening ideas. He can be solid, he can be aggressive, and we do see that Wesley tried to surprise Alexei by playing the Grunfeld. It's certainly not the main opening of Wesley, but suddenly he is confronted with a very direct line, which is a nightmare for black if you want to play for a win. This bishop b5 check caused many sleepless nights for all the Grunfeld players if you feel like you are playing against a lower rated opponent who might be prepared and ready to play bishop b5 check, or you face a very strong opponent who says that, you know what, with white, draw is a perfect result for me today. Black is basically never getting any chances of fighting for more than a draw, but there is a small little catch. This queen c2, this is a modern direction. However, it's already well established that with precise play back, black equalizes. The only problem is that equalizing is not really the scenario that Wesley needs. And this is how we reach the current position, rook ab1 on the board. You mentioned that the bishop is hanging. So usually Just to show why black has to capture on e5, because if black falls back with the bishop to e6, there's actually stunning tactic with knight takes g6.
Beautiful.
And after h takes g6, bishop takes g7 with a double attack on the queen and on the rook, which is very bad news for Wesley. As you mentioned, if after rook a b1 you have to trade on e5, you are giving up on all your winning chances.
And yes, black is up a pawn here, but just look at the dark squares that surround black's king. Obviously, white's compensation is not in question. The big question here is, can black somehow unbalance the game and garner any chances whatsoever? I guess that depends on the subsequent course of the game. What scares me is that Alexei is clearly still well within his preparation. So not only will he reach this position in which it's hard to conceive of serious chances, but likely Alexei also knows how to arrange his pieces subsequently. Queen a5, I think, is a very likely move here. Then the bishop will maybe drop back to c3, and I think Alexei will try to optimize the placement of his queen. Queen c2 to d2 looks like a promising idea, either to head up to d4 or even to h6, and it just seems to me that white's chances, long-term chances, on the king side, coupled with the presence of opposite-colored bishops, really will make it. Yeah, queen b2 also looking amazing because you're stopping rook a to b8. That will run into queen takes b8, and that epitomizes just the long-term problems that black is experiencing with the dark squares around his king. If black plays f6, then you weaken more stuff. You allow bishop b4. If Wesley pulls this off, I will be shocked.
Yes, actually, this is a very fashionable line, and it was posing some problems for black. I mean, many players were suffering. I think Matthias Blubaum is one of the leading experts from the white side. He had at least 20 games in this line. I believe I'm not exaggerating, and mostly on the internet, blitz games. Black is usually tested to the maximum of showing precision to make a draw. And then knowing that actually Wesley needs to fight for a win in this position, I feel like it's nearly impossible.
Yeah, this is a disaster for Wesley, who has had such a topsy-turvy event. He could have been knocked out by Jules Moussard in the previous round. Jules had a winning position in the decisive rapid game, failed to convert it, and all credit to Wesley for defending like a monster, despite clearly not being in ideal form. But then he met his ultimate fate at the hands of Alexei Sarana, who delivers a crushing blow with black yesterday, and now chooses his opening very wisely and is knocking on the door of advancing to the next round, Peter. I think it's pretty clear that Wesley essentially needs divine intervention to win this game. And on that note, perhaps we can continue traveling around the horn and looking at our very exciting first 30 minutes of games.
Yes, I would like to go immediately to the Vocaturo Salem Saleh game because of the reason that yesterday we completely ignored this match, and we spoke about it, that I think for all the Italian chess fans and all the UAE chess fans from United Arab Emirates, they are looking forward to this sensational matchup. Both players in great shape, in great form. The first game ended in a draw, and we do see a strategical battle. It's the Carlsbad structure, just very quickly to check. Oh, wow, it's a big surprise. Salem is famous for playing King Sindian or the Grimfeld, but he goes e6. It seems like he wants to be very solid. He also feels that, yes, it's the World Cup, it's a knockout event. You know, I have to try to adjust my play, be as solid as possible. And we see a classical, traditional Carlsbad. Knight g2, the most ambitious. Yeah, white is keeping the position as flexible as possible. Rook e8, castles, knight with e7, a4, modern fashion. Daniele Vocaturo is also famous of being a very good theoretician. I have been playing with him for the team Padova in European Club Cups and in Italian League. He is a very nice person. And Salem is also a very close friend of mine, so it's a very special matchup for me.
Same here, Peter. I know Salem very well. We've done an all-nighter of Blitz in Gibraltar before joining our flight back to London, which we barely made. So I had a great travel experience with him and many Blitz marathons online. So definitely both of these players can confirm really great people. And of course, Italian chess fans could not be more proud of Daniele Vocaturo, who had such a difficult matchup against Daniel Dubov, and he beat him with the black pieces in sparkling tactical style. But he has to move on and face another very difficult opponent. The last move of the game, bishop c8 to f5, challenging white's control over the center. So the question is, this Carlsbad, is it Carl's good for white, or is black doing a good job of neutralizing white's central play, Peter?
Yeah, black has made some very high profile regrouping. The same applies for white, just very quickly to understand what's really going on. So in this opening, if white plays the standard f2, f3, trying to hint at e3, e4, that's usually answered with the counterplay with b7, b5. It's a very fashionable line. And because black wants to go b5 against f3, white says, you know what, I'm gonna stop you from playing b5. Now it would be a big mistake from black to just try to play on general principles and punish the move a4 with the move a5, because then white plays f3 and there is no way of stopping e3, e4. There is no more b7, b5 counterplay, and white gets the upper hand. So after a4, black switches, black trades that dark square bishops off the board. Bishop takes e7, queen takes e7. Now also the queen pressures the e3 pawn. It's very difficult for white to prepare the move f3, and in order to understand what happened in the game, we know that white wants to play f3 and finally prepare e4. That's why first he goes a5. Now black develops the knight from d7 to f6, and look at the next couple of moves from black. He wants to use that knight from h5, g6, knight g7, bishop f5, the typical plan. Now it's all about timing. You have to be super precise. And after knight c1, g6, rook e1, knight g7, f3, bishop f5, I feel that if white is not able to play the move e3, e4, then everything worked to perfection in black's case. So let's just try to find out what happens after e4. I think black reacts d takes e4, f takes e4, and the very critical and important move that he can play the move rook a d8. I think this is still some kind of a deep theoretical point. And if this move works, black solves all his problems.
And that knight on c1 is really hurting white. It is disrupting the coordination between the heavy pieces, and that means...
Yes, this is the whole point. I think we lost Danya for a second before he reconnects. Let me continue. Yes, black is threatening to take rook takes d4, and using the fact that this knight causes some headache. The problem is that, yes, one could argue that white can't play the move knight b3, but then black gets bishop g4 and some serious counterplay is achieved. The queen has to move, and for example, after queen d2, black can fall back with the bishop to e6. It's a lovely typical maneuver, hitting the knight on b3, and the rook attacks the pawn on d4. That's the big problem, and white will not be able to coordinate forces. And for this reason, Daniela did spend some time and said, you know what, it seems to me like Salem is playing this opening way too quickly. It means that he is very much within his preparation. I don't want to test him there. And this rook a8 move disturbs me, so let me just be solid and play the move queen d2. However, this case, black most probably will trade the light square bishop at some point. Maybe he's not in a hurry, because if we take on d3, then actually white can recapture with the knight, and that sleeping knight will get access to a lovely e5 square. So I would say, like, you know what, if you are not starting to play e4 anymore, then I just bring the rook to d8 and wait for your move. It's not so easy for white to make a useful move. You don't want to move with the knight to this direction towards b3, because it does absolutely nothing. Generally, there could be a case that one could argue that, okay, but hang on, then white removes the bishop. All right, white removes the bishop, but what did white achieve? The whole point would be for white to break with e3, e4. However, with the black bishop on f5, it's kind of obvious that this e3, e4 break will never really work. Black can also just play the standard move h5, just making sure that white will not be able to expand on the king side with g4. Lot of strategical finesses, but I do believe that Black
The outage
has
in
a
my
very
area.
solid position, and I'm expecting a big strategical battle. I believe that we also have Danya back with us. Danya, do you hear me? I'm still
Yes.
not hearing you.
Let me connect to Discord.
Yes, now I already hear you. Excellent. So Danya is just seconds away of joining us.
Yes, you should be able to hear me now.
Yes, it's perfect.
I apologize for that. There's a storm here in Charlotte, and AT&T, my internet service provider, had a brief outage. Nothing I could do about that. So the weather in my area is okay, but I got a notification this morning that this might happen. But for now, I'm back.
Yes, and the good news is you haven't missed out on any action. I was explaining some small subtleties of this specific Carlsbad structure. And please share your thoughts on this position.
Okay, so we had the last move, Queen D2. And, okay, so it's currently Black to move. So I missed absolutely nothing.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, great.
I basically explained that Black usually plays another move, Rook A8, since White isn't really threatening to play E3-4 if he haven't done it before. And I also believe that by removing the bishops, it's not a big deal for Black, because then the push E3-4 will not really be possible for White. I do believe that Black has kind of equalized. It's a big, long strategical battle, which gives us the chance also to move on to the next game and take a look. Do you have any preference where you want to go?
I do. I feel strongly about this. I think we should go to the Nepo game, because the Nepo game started out as a very conventional line that has been known for many years. And, okay, it looks like there has been a transmission error. Maybe my internet isn't the only one that went down, but apparently the Nepo game has gone haywire because of a transmission error. So perhaps we should skip on that game for now, and we will get that proper transmission for you when the organizers fix it. So barring the Nepo game, I'm kind of looking around. We've got a lot of pretty tame positions. We have this Vahapsanal Ivanchuk position that's pretty crazy. And
no, it already ended. It's a draw, yeah, exactly. That's why I wanted to bring it up, because very quickly it's important to understand what happened here. It was the Petrov defense, the famous Ivanchuk, yeah, that you can try to guess what he will play, but you will never be able to make it right.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure that San al-Wahab never in his dream felt like this could happen, that Chucky will play the Petrov, but he does. And in this fashionable line, which Jan Nepomniachtchi has used against Asadli, against Vugar Asadli during the World Cup, is played by San al-Wahab. And Chucky, after Queen H5, opted for G6, Queen H6, Bishop F8, Queen E3, Bishop E7, Black is threatening to castle, and San al-Wahab thought, like, you know what, actually tiebreak is perfectly fine with me. I so far have a fantastic record in the tiebreaks, and I'm ready to call it a day. They went on to repeat, and the game already ended in a draw.
And I think that's a pretty reasonable decision. Vahapsanal is a great blitz player. I've played him a lot online, and obviously we saw similar decision making in the Lizzie Potts Ju and June game. Hindsight is 2020, so Vahapsanal could lose the tiebreak, and we could say, well, he had the white pieces. Why didn't he try to exploit them? But from a purely statistical standpoint, I think a very reasonable decision, Peter.
Yeah, it's basically perfectly understandable. The tension is growing. I think also Chucky is kind of happy because he solved the problems with the black pieces, but it's all mind games. It's all going to be decided tomorrow who will keep the better nerves. It's anybody's match, I have to say, but we move on. This also gives us a chance probably to check out on Ferenc Belkes, because we also yesterday ignored that game. Ponomaryov, Ruslan Ponomaryov is in a must-win situation with the white pieces. He lost against a very sharp FC Nimzo by Belkes, and the big question was that Belkes suddenly was terrorizing the whole World Cup with e4, e6, the French, but nobody has played the move 3 knight c3 against him. So I was actually wondering, what did Belkes really prepared for this tournament? And now we get the answer. He prepared the ultra solid Rubinstein system with d takes d4, knight d4, knight d7. Well, this is a good luck task for white to try to crack it.
Man, you've got a double whammy. You're facing one of the most solid grandmasters of all time, honestly, Ferenc Berkish. He's had some crazy no-loss streaks. And you're facing him in one of the most solid lines that you can play. Georg Meyer, of course, is perhaps the most famous modern proponent of the Rubinstein. He's played it his whole life with a lot of success against some of the leading players. Now, the downside is that white does have quite a few dangerous systems, and one of them is this early c3 move. As far as I know, considered one of the most testing lines, and the idea is to support the d4 pawn so that you could quickly jump with the knight to e5. And of course, you are trying to deliver a very nasty check on b5, which would force black to compromise his position with knight f6 to d7. That is out of the question. So Berkish, prophylaxis, a6, stopping bishop b5, but yielding white another tempo to get ahead in development. And Pano uses that to pressure the c5 pawn and try to resolve the central tension in his favor. So c takes d4 would allow white to stabilize the bishop on a commanding post in the center, which is why Berkish says, no, I'm going to keep the tension, and he plays the very typical French move, queen d8 to c7. And Ponomarev insists on the campaign of delivering a check on that diagonal. He does it with the queen. Berkish covers it with his knight, doesn't want to give away the bishop pair. That is a bit of an interesting decision. And bishop b5. Peter, this is where things really start to heat up.
Yes, I think it's a very mainstream theory. I believe like some 10 years ago it was very fashionable. The point, however, is that probably Berkish is more in his preparation than Ruslan. I do remember that Pono had some experience with this very line, like some 10, 15 years ago. But also from the white side, you have to be so super precise in order to pose the problems. Yeah, because queen takes d4, I believe that the line was going something like bishop b5, a4, and then bishop d6. Was it like this? And white had different possibilities to sacrifice his knight on f7 or somewhere after he's anyway recapturing the bishop. And black has vulnerable pawn structure, but black is very solid. Well, it's going to be a big theoretical duel, but I'm not sure that the players are really that prepared. You mentioned the name Georg Meyer. I mean, if you ask Georg, I think he will tell you that I spent probably 50 years of my 50 hours of my life analyzing just this specific position.
The Rubinstein French is such a complex line because of the just abundance of options that white has. And you're right, the time expenditure does seem to indicate that the players are out of their preparation. Bishop d7 back to c8 is Ferenc Berkish's choice. He keeps the bishop pair, but in return, he undevelops his queen's bishop. I guess his next moves will be bishop f8 to e7. Then he will castle, and maybe eventually he will try to redeploy the bishop with b5 and bishop b7. Obviously, it's a risky approach. White currently holds a lead in development, but the great thing about the Rubinstein is that the structure is so incredibly solid that even with a big lead in development, it can often be very hard to convert that development lead into something more tangible, like an initiative.
Yes, I even have the feeling that this is some kind of a bomb. You know, this bishop d7, c8 was prepared by Berkish. It's not over the board inspiration, whatever. He opts for it. Very tricky situation psychologically for Ponomarev, because he's in a must-win situation. You feel like, wow, hang on. If I'm not able to punish this move right away in the next couple of moves, black here will have zero problems. Yeah, so I feel like there is some super tension on white. I'm expecting probably the most sharpest continuation, a move like long castle in the position and reinforcing the pressure. Eventually, there might also be some knight c4, knight b6 idea at some point in the position. But Berkish is in his book. That's for sure.
And it's interesting. Bishop b5, you're right, is the main line by a country mile. Bishop c8 is an over-the-board novelty. The only games that show up on my database are correspondence games, and pretty obscure correspondence games at that. The highest-rated correspondence player, around 2,300. And all of the players followed this move up with f6 and e5, an incredibly ambitious approach, moving the pawns out and kicking the knight away from e5. So this game promises to be very tactically rich as Ruslan tries to deliver an on-demand victory and take this match, that is, to the tie breaks. And on that note, folks, it is time for us to take our first break of the day. This promises to be really an incredibly exciting, a memorable round with so many matchups. We will check back into Magnus and Hikaru's games, but first, it's time to refill our coffee cups. We will be back with more World Cup action on the other side of this short break.
I understand. 18 seconds for a black, so not too much time there either. Rook c7. A7's falling.
It is. E4. He pushes the pawn. This is getting a little messy. Takes a knight f1.
Knight f3.
Like knight f3.
King e4. Knight e1.
Move.
Oh my gosh, 0.9 seconds when that move was played.
On b1. Move the rook.
I was going to say king c2 and run the king.
King
Knight
e2,
g3.
Knight d4. Takes it. Takes it. A7.
Oh my gosh.
Takes it right. Knight c2 was winning.
But there was checkmate in 1 for black after knight takes g3.
Oh my god, that was me! And instead he played here, and Giner losing on time.
Oh my
knight c2 and
gosh.
a7 wins for white.
Oh my gosh.
Chess.com's game review recently got a major update. Here are 4 key notes. At the end of each game review, you will now see a summary of the game from your coach, your performance rating for that game, and a quick grade for you and your opponent in the opening, middle game, and end game. We've added a new classification called miss for when a move fails to take advantage of an opportunity, but it is otherwise a sound move. We've also changed the definition of blunder. Now a move will only be considered a blunder if it loses material or allows a checkmate. Coach will now draw arrows and highlight squares when you hover over or click on the highlighted words in the move explanations. This should make move explanations easier to follow. Finally, Coach's explanations will now reference specific pieces and threats in explanations, making move explanations much more intuitive. The new game review experience is available on chess.com right now. This international master became the only player to have a 100% record in both the Open and Women's World Cup after the third round. Eline Robers topped off the first game of the event with a brilliant rook sacrifice that, if taken, will fork the queen. Under no danger, the reigning Dutch women's champion took home the first match, 2-0. In the second match, Robers faced woman grandmaster Khaled Mona. Again, Robers prevailed. In their second game, it was another brilliant rook sacrifice that paved the way to victory. The third match saw an opponent of similar strength, international master Claudia Coulon. In a shaky first game, Robers was able to find a ladder sequence that would eventually win a queen, prompting Coulon to resign. In the second game of the match, Robers discovered a mate in 9 sequence, which, after being hastened, turned into checkmate on the board. 6 games, 6 wins.
Well, Eline Robers is one of the most exciting, shining stars in the world of women's chess, and she has not disappointed in the World Cup so far as we look at her progression to round 4, where she faces her toughest competition yet. She drew her first game yesterday against Ranavali Harika. I teach a group class, Peter, to talented kids, and we spent an hour analyzing that pawn endgame yesterday, so she really cannot be upset at the win that she missed. It was incredibly convoluted, and she has another very unbalanced position in her game today with the black pieces.
Yes, it's a very interesting position. It came from a Trompovsky. This automatically guarantees very double-edged fight. She does play the line, which is, I believe, the most principled, the dirty action with d5, e3, and c5. Whatever happens, she shows excellent preparation. I'm really liking this type of attitude, going always for the critical lines, not shying away from complications if necessary. Knight f3, bishop takes d5. So yes, we do see that black has doubled pawns on the f file. On the other hand, black has the dark squared bishop. I'm usually so much more happy of having the dark squared bishop, and I don't really care about these double pawns. Knight c6 played, castles a6, knight d2, bishop a7, and the slightly mysterious, to me, this move knight d2 b3. What is your take on this?
Yeah, knight b3. My guess is that Dronavali might be preparing c2, c4, and of course the question is why not c4 on the previous move? And I would advance that perhaps she was worried about the pawn advance d5, d4. That is a very hard position to evaluate. The engine seems skeptical about c4, d4. From black's perspective, white could trade everything on d4 and then try to drive a wedge with b4 and c5. This might be an idea that perhaps Dronavali underestimated. So knight takes, it maybe even immediately b4 straight away. You don't mind giving away your light squared bishop because your knights are actually excellent pieces in this position. They can be used as chisels, right? You can chisel your way into the d6 square. You can play c5 and then knight c4, knight d6. And this is looking pretty appealing for white, but perhaps Harika wanted to prevent d4, and so she deploys her knight to b3 instead. But it does seem, Peter, a little bit slow, and I feel like this does give Eline the tempo that she wants to either complete her development or get her queen off of the d-file.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this knight b3 move looks a bit slow to me. Yes, also c4 isn't a threat anymore because c4 runs into d takes c4 and the queen trades are automatic. I even believe that black can simply just play a move like short castle. I mean, there is nothing disturbing black from doing the move short castle. I feel like black has all the reasons to be happy with the outcome of the opening.
And after short castle c4, perhaps black can even trade on c4, trade queens, and it seems like black's king will be entirely safe with the queens off the board. So I'm totally with you. I feel like knight b3 is a step in the wrong direction, and looks like Eline is out of the woods in the opening. But perhaps we can take that as a sign to look at some of the other top games in the women's section, including the game of Alexandra Guryashkina, who is, of course, one of the pre-tournament favorites. She faces Nino Batsiashvili, a very experienced Georgian grandmaster. Fun fact, a couple of years ago, Nino Batsiashvili drew Magnus Carlsen in round 1 of the Qatar Masters. I think that was 2014, so definitely not an easy opponent for Sasha.
Yeah, not at all, and we have a very wild position.
Whoa.
I somehow feel like it happened from like almost the same position like yesterday in Vincent's KEYMER game, but there is a catch that black has committed the move knight c6, knight bd7 first, and bishop f4, bishop b4. And that's how we reach this c takes d5, e d5. We see so many different type of Carlsbad structures. It's just insane, yeah. And we do see almost the same idea, because after e3, knight e4, black is already going for the g7, g5 aggression. But white is in time to control this. She plays the move queen c2. g5 was met by bishop e5, which is not a standard move, because black can now simply capture on e5, one could argue, but probably Goryachkina is very well prepared, and she knows that this knight takes e5, knight takes c5 is good for her. Looking at the time situation, very much indicates that she is still in book. And after rook g8, she opted for h3, making sure that g5, g4 is stopped. And after knight b6, knight d2 challenges the knight on e4.
It's funny, we saw Jordan play knight b3. We didn't like that move. I'm also not a fan of Nino's move, knight b6, and she's just taken on d2. Whoa. Has she allowed queen c2 takes h7, intermezzo hitting the rook, and then the king can pick up the knight on d2? I feel like this is spinning completely out of control for the Georgian player.
Yes, I mean, you called it. The move knight b6 already looked very strange. It just feels like it's the wrong direction. Knight d2 and black takes on d2. Maybe there were also not really so many good options, because bishop f5 might have run into bishop d3.
And the knight.
That's, yeah.
The knight's hard to stabilize that knight, and once the knight disappears, the floodgates really open on the king's side.
Yes, so she took on d2 maybe out of despair, but yeah, now what happens after queen takes h7? Let's just take a look, because the queen attacks the rook on g8. How do we deal with this problem at all?
I don't think black does. I mean, rook f8, I guess, moving the rook out of the purview of the queen. But after rook f8, rook f8, king takes d2, and I don't want to say the game is over, but black can't move. You can't even play f6 because the c7 pawn falls. You would have to develop your light squared bishop, I guess, but you're a pawn down. Bishop g7 is also a huge threat, simply trapping the rook, and man, what a disaster in only 11 moves.
Yes, and one could argue that white has lost the right to castle. The white's king is in the center, but look at black's colleague is on e8, and I don't really see black getting 3 easy moves of getting something like bishop e6, queen d7 or queen e7 and long castle in, because if black gets all these moves in, then she has compensation, long-term compensation, but I just feel that she will not have this time. White even has ideas like breaking the construction on the king side with a timely h4, and after g takes h4, then rook takes h4 will also appear in the game. It's looking very bad for the Georgian.
It is indeed. But first, Alexander will have to find the move queen takes h7, and obviously she sees it. This is an elementary intermediate move. It hits the rook, and this is the product of incredible opening preparation. This is just what can happen when one player is so much better prepared and understands the positions better than the other. Well, we will leave Goryachkina here to figure out the move queen takes h7, which she already did. She wasting no additional time and grabbing that pawn, hitting the rook, and reaching a winning position out of the opening. And perhaps we can leave Nino Batsiashvili now to her defensive devices and go back to the open section, where we have a couple of developments in our marquee matchups waiting for us.
Yeah, that's a good point. Vincent's position against Magnus is very interesting. I think that this is some completely new territory. Let me check the opening. Yes, we don't have a single game with this position. We did see Magnus Carlsen going for bishop g5, h6, Vincent taking time for h6 after bishop h4. He did play the move d6. He speculated that, yes, you never know that do you include that b7, b5 move first, or do you play d6? I believe that the move that Vincent chose looks like the most natural move, d6. You don't want to determine your pawn structure yet. And Magnus, let me just check. After d4, do we have a game for this? No, zero games. After d4 already, no games at all.
My God, and that's, you know, this is the Spanish that we're talking about. There are games in every line here. I'm also checking the correspondence database here after bishop h4, d6. Yes, d4 is a novelty in both the OTB and correspondence database, and it makes sense visually. I mean, you're trying to punish black for opening up the knight on c6 to a pin by the bishop, and you are exploiting the brief window of opportunity that you have before black plays the move b7, b5. And the structure that you get as a result, Peter, is very different from what we normally see in this line. The center opens up, Vincent trades on d4 and plays bishop d7, and Magnus takes on c6 with the bishop. So he takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop d7, and I think for some players, it might be a little bit counterintuitive to take with the bishop, but normally you want to keep this knight firmly entrenched in the center. This knight is a very important cog in white's attacking machine. So we have the trade on c6, knight c3, castles, queen to d3 by Magnus Carlsen, deploying the queen. And I want your take on this move, Peter. And the final move that we have right now, bishop c5 to b4. Okay, what's going on here?
Yeah, well, the move queen d3 was a very interesting move, and I think the main idea of Magnus that he still keeps all his options open, yeah, that he can castle short, he can castle long, depending which move, which choice Vincent takes. And the move bishop c5 to b4 clearly indicates that Vincent wants to stop long castles, yeah, because after long castles now he would be able to take on c3, and after queen takes c3, take on e4.
Okay.
That's what I'm guessing.
Queen takes c3 and knight takes c4, and the tactics seem to work out for black because the queen on c3 is also hanging. So I'll just show this line. Bishop takes d8, knight takes c3, and the rook is hanging. You have to take the knight. Black takes on d8, and black is simply a pawn up. White has nothing to show for it. And that is the tactical justification of the move bishop b4. Now, Peter, what if you go short castles in this position? Black plays bishop takes c3, and perhaps you play the move b takes c3 and bank on the pin against the knight, because black really does not want to play the move g7, g5, unless that move is supplemented by very careful thinking.
Yes, on the other hand, I believe that it would be some kind of an achievement for black if white is forced to castle short, yeah, especially knowing that Magnus is in a must-win situation. It indicates me that anything which more or less resembles a strategical fight is what black is looking for. And I'm guessing that judging by the fact that Magnus opted for the the quick d3 bishop g5 plan, and then he was ready to spice things up immediately with d3 d4, he wants a very double-edged position. So I'm not seeing Magnus actually castling short so easily. I mean, he might make the move, but it will take him some time to decide on it. Anything else is also like knight d4 to e2, reinforcing the threat of going long castles. That could be another move, yeah, just to keep as much tension as possible in the position.
General question, would you say that Magnus right now, maybe it's too early to tell, is he happy with the early outcome of the opening? Is this the kind of position he had in mind when he was falling asleep yesterday?
I think it was very important for him to get Vincent out of the book as quickly as possible, and he definitely succeeded. He does have a very nice time advantage. Yeah, it's at the moment 20 minutes. It already used to be much more than that. I think it was also 25, nearly 30 minutes. On the other hand, I believe that so far Vincent has handled the situation quite nicely, very professionally. He was taking his time, but he made very sound decisions. And because of this fact, I'm not sure if Magnus is so happy or he was hoping something more out of the surprise. But in any case, he got a game and it's all to play for.
He got an unbalanced position. He's got the time advantage, and he had a big time advantage yesterday as well. So as you said, Vincent, no stranger to being down on time. But again, we're only 12 moves in. The position already very rich. It's way too early to make any general conclusions. We will keep an eye on Magnus's decision making here. And of course, we have our other big marquee matchup of the day. And that game is heating up as well, as if on cue. Let us travel to Hikaru Nakamura land. And Pragnananda's king has just traveled from the center to the queen side. The last move, long castle by Prague. And he is offering up the pawn on g4, which has not advanced to g5, Peter. So perhaps we can rewind a little bit here. After d3, c6, queen b3, remember this move. Bishop dropped back to e7, and Prague's decision was, in fact, to complete his development. We expected that this was one of the top possibilities. Hikaru played d6, and a big decision, long castle by Pragnananda. What is going on here?
Well, basically, it means to me that Prague believes that black is not really threatening to take on g4. Otherwise, he would have defended that pawn with rook g1. But as commentators, our duty is to take a look what happens. And the most natural capture is black capturing with the knight from f6 on g4. Exactly. So we have no choice. I believe bishop takes g4, bishop g4 is forced. And here is the big question that do we play for the rook 8 g1 and eventually f3 rook takes g7 idea, or do we try to collect the b7 pawn? What is your take on this?
I think the issue with queen takes b7 move, queen d8 to c8, and I really would not be, it would be unappetizing to me to go into this endgame. Why? Because, well, black has the bishop pair. Black has a very mobile pawn mass on the king side and potentially in the center. This is not really in the spirit of the position. So instead, I would be inclined to play on the king side with rook hg1, but now you have to reckon with this other annoying move, queen d7, which defends both the bishop and the b7 pawn. Presumably, you would chase the bishop away with f3. But what really scares me here, Peter, is this very typical idea. You drop the bishop back, and then after rook takes g7, you close the door on the rook with bishop g6. And Prague, he had to see this position in his mind's eye when he was playing the move long castles, because black is threatening to win the rook and potentially the game with bishop f6. And the position just explodes here. White might have to play a crazy move like d4 in order to take black's attention away from this threat of capturing the rook. What do you make of this line?
Yeah, I go perfectly along with this line. I was also trying to figure out, and I think the big point is that, yes, white is counting now on the move dc d4, and after bishop f6, rook takes g6, fg6, knight e4 tactics.
Hitting the bishop, and black's position suddenly collapses because, let's say you move the bishop back, white simply plays de. Bishop takes e5, and white doesn't need to sacrifice anything else. You just chase the bishop away, and just everything falls apart here for black. Hikaru would pay the price for overcooking it and keeping his king in the center for too long. Do you think Prague sees the move d4, or is there a possibility that he missed queen d7?
No, it's simply impossible that, yes, he simply cannot miss that move. And it basically brings us back to that position after move 16 d4. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'll show this line again, though. I'll show this line again just to make sure everybody's on the same page, because that was a lot of moves, so I wanted to recap the line again. What we're looking at here is what happens if Hikaru accepts the sacrifice. Now, we think queen b7, queen c8 is good for black, so white plays rook hg1. Now queen d7 defends both pawns, f3 chases away the bishop, and now this trick with bishop f5, bishop g6, the rook is trapped, white has to strike in the center, and take it away, Peter, from here.
Yes, and the big question is that if bishop f6 is not possible, then how does black react? I don't see any other move apart of e takes d4, but then after bishop takes d4, black is never really threatening to capture or trap that rook. That rook might become quite powerful. The bishop on d4 is fantastically placed. I'm not exactly sure that Hikaru would like to do this, so it brings me back that maybe actually black should not try to trap that rook on g7, maybe even simply has to fall back with his bishop to e6. It's more solid, and it's a mini match. I think that Hikaru wants to be as solid as possible, and after rook takes g7, then now he has some option. I don't know exactly which one to prefer, but it looks like a more or less decent position.
Yeah, I mean, the phrase that comes to mind, and I know that I'm a lazy commentator when I use this phrase, is dynamic equality. And this is a common phrase used in books. What it basically means is that the position is unbalanced, as it clearly is here, but both players have very decent chances. Both players are happy with what they have, and the position here would be almost impossible to handle on calculation alone. You would have to trust your intuition because there's so much going on. D5 is possible, something more prophylactic like B6. And Hikaru has already invested a good amount of time on this 11th move as we go back to the live board. If he doesn't play knight takes G4, I'm struggling to find something that appeals to me, an alternative, because castle's short looks like harakiri. You're walking right into G5. You can't move this bishop and give up B7. Queen C7 maybe, but that seems a little bit passive, and I feel like it plays into White's hands. So I really think there's a high likelihood that we go down this rabbit hole, and what a fascinating rabbit hole that would be. Big update, Peter. Wesley So is out of the World Cup. Alexei Sarana has indeed drawn that game. An amazing opening choice by Alexei, completely neutralizing Wesley's Grunfeld, and we congratulate Alexei Sarana for scoring a big upset and knocking Wesley out of the World Cup.
Yeah, unbelievable performance. I mean, yesterday he just crushed Wesley. And there was an interview, I've watched his interview, and he was actually revealing that if he has a chance, he will play very solidly, he will trade everything, and will force a draw. I'm not sure if Wesley was listening to this interview or not, or he expected, because the point is that you know that Sadan is a very aggressive, dynamic player from the white side. So probably Wesley should have, if he wanted to play something, he had to play d4, g6, and just fianchetto his bishop on g7 and play something which is very much not his style. He likes to play objectively correct chess. Yeah, he is not this guy that he loves to play strange kind of openings. But I think that was his only chance to try to get a fight, because every single opening battle would have been shut down by Sarana as he did with the Grunfeld.
But ultimately, you know, there's only so much you can do against a 2680 GM going on 2700 who is determined to make a draw with White. I feel like Alexei is an absolute nightmare scenario in that situation. And of course, Wesley was not the only player who is in a must-win situation. We've got quite a few others. We've got Etienne Bacro, who needs to defeat Vidit Gujarati on demand. Perhaps we should run over to that game real quick, Peter, and see what's going on. As French fans are cheering on Etienne Bacro, who has to win in order to force a tiebreaker. And I think he has succeeded in getting a very complicated game, but first impressions are that Vidit has a pretty good position.
Yes, it looks like, but it's a double-edged position, and probably Etienne knows exactly that Vidit is so well prepared that he won't be able to touch him in the openings. And in this case, he prefers to play a long game. And basically, looking at the opening moves, it was some slow English, some symmetrical English. He was kind of inviting this type of position.
Yeah, he plays this Botvinnik setup with e4 and c4. This is what I would call a non-theoretical opening. He's completely avoiding theory, and he's avoiding direct confrontation between the armies. This is a very schematic position. Vidit responds with the same setup, the only difference being that he's got the knight on f6 and Etienne has the knight on e2, which creates an interesting imbalance because it makes it easier for White to execute this f2, f4 plan, Peter. Black would need to move this knight out of f6 in order to contest that with f7, f5. But Etienne goes for something different. He induces h6, drops back the bishop, and there it is. There's that f4 move, and Vidit counterstrikes on the other side with b7, b5, and now we finally have direct confrontation between the armies.
Yes, it's a very complex double-edged position. We should not be fooled that it's a symmetric structure. Black seems to be fine. Yes, black seems to be fine, but White has so many options to eventually also change the character of the game. Yes, something like f takes e5, d takes e5, and eventually White knight can land on d5. And after the trade on d5, like knight takes d5, c takes d5, we get a protected pass pawn on d5, and also some possibilities against the black pawn on c5. So really all to play for in this position.
And I would contemplate the immediate knight c5 with just crazy complications. And black would also have to decide whether or not to play b takes c4 first. And if you analyze this carefully, one of the benefits, this is such subtle. I love positional chess for this reason. You can really trace the nuances of the position. B takes c4, according to the computer, does favor black because after dc, knight takes d5, most likely white will play c takes d5. And now black has this shot a6, a5 in order to activate this bishop and deploy it to a6. This is a highly nasty idea because black is threatening to first take on e2 and pin the queen and the king with bishop a6. And it's actually not that easy for white to keep black's pieces at bay. If instead black would have immediately taken on d5, then these queenside pawns would have actually blocked black from activating his bishop, and the c5 pawn would have also served as a major target down the semi-open c-file. So these are the kinds of nuances that the players will have to factor in and the kinds of decisions that they're going to have to make. Presumably, they're going to be spending loads of time on the next couple of moves, but definitely we will keep an eye on this fascinating battle. Well, back to you, Peter. Any preferences for the game that we go to next?
Yeah, well, it's we haven't checked out Fabi yet, yeah. So I think that would be a fair choice.
Let's go to Caruana land, the all-American matchup between Fabi and Ray Robson. And at first glance, it looks like a very standard Italian position, but I'm also looking at black's clock, and I'm seeing that Ray is down to 55 minutes, and he's thinking very intently. Do we think that white might have a little bit of a pull here? And if so, how is this position different from what we normally see out of an Italian?
Yeah, in order to know that, yeah, we have to take a look at the move orders and to understand who benefited from something. I mean, I do see that Fabi at start was trying to play without the move h3. Yeah, that's kind of very important if we go quickly here through that. After a5, rook a1, rook e1, bishop a7, he did not play the standard h3 move. He played knight b2 and trying to get that knight to f1 as quickly as possible.
Indeed. Black responded with h6, Peter. h6 here, obviously, in the modern treatment, that often prepares g7, g5. But in this case, Ray had no intention of playing g5. Instead, he castled kingside. Fabi completed the maneuver, and Ray initiated the symmetrical maneuver with knight e7. Now, there's h3 by Fabi. So he only played this on the 11th move. Then he made the typical Italian retreating move, bishop b3, taking the sting out of d6, d5. And bishop e6, the bishop tucks itself away on a nice, comfy, warm bed on c2. This is the current position.
Yes, and the big question is that does black plays this move d6, d5? It's a very double-edged move because usually black wants to, because white is the one now setting d3, d4 himself. Yeah, if it's white to move, white will play d4. So the big question always in these positions, who strikes first in the center? And I believe that, I don't know if it's working, but certainly d5 is the first move that you have to calculate.
It absolutely has to be properly assessed. And from white's perspective, of course, you should start by trying to understand, do I play e takes d5? Now, it seems to me that black should probably take with the queen, because bishop takes d5 runs into knight takes d5. And if you play knight takes d5, there's this very nasty idea d4, so instructive. And you can see that actually the f7 pawn is overloaded. E takes d4, drops a piece out of nowhere to bishop takes g6, and you're going to lose either the knight or the bishop. And so that narrows it down to queen takes d5, but the standard response is bishop back to b3. You see this all the time, chasing the queen back. And if the queen drops back to d6, one avenue that Fabi could pursue is to trade on e6 and try to orchestrate an initiative down the e-file with d4. This seems pretty unappetizing to me, Peter, and maybe on the basis of this line, Ray is reluctant to open up the center with d5. What do you make of that analysis?
Yes, I think you hit perfectly the points that whenever after d5, e5, you have to capture with the queen, and then white can start kicking that queen away with tempo, with the moves like bishop b3, and then you end up getting pinned on the e-file. You don't feel tempted to go for it. So basically you spend 5 minutes making sure that yes, d5 doesn't work. Then you start asking your question, okay, hang on. But if d5 doesn't work, then how do I stop the move d3, d4? And the move which computer actually prefers here, the move c7, c5, isn't the most natural one because it closes down the bishop on a7. Yes, it does fight for the d4 square, but it's not an easy choice.
Man, this is like a modern art installation on the queen side. What on earth is going on? You do see the move c7, c5, of course, in the Rui Lopez. You see it in the Chigorin. So it's not that this structure with c5, d6, c5, the reverse pawn triangle, is quite common. It's, I guess, the combination of the pawns on c5 and a5 that are producing some sort of jarring effect on me. And of course, white could still play d4 and seek confrontation in the center. Then you could get, let's say, a trade of the c pawns to open up the c file potentially for the black rook. And now black can make some sort of slower move, you know, like rook e8 or maybe rook c8. But it does seem to me that white is slightly better here nonetheless. But what would be the motivation, Peter, behind engineering this trade of the d-pawns? And would you be tempted to trade once again with e takes d4?
Well, in general, I'm also very happy here from the white side. I do feel that white got something out of the opening. And first of all, I don't really believe that Ray will play the move c5. It just seems to be too committal, and I don't really see, humanly speaking, the benefit. Yeah, computer does indicate that this is the best move according to computer. I would even argue that if black's pawn would be on a6 instead of a5, the move c5 would be so much more natural, yeah, because then we don't have to think about the b5 square and all these weakened light squares on the queen side. Then c5 would be kind of thematic move. But with the pawn on a5, I feel like something like c6, queen c7, b5 is more of a human way of playing this position. On the other hand, I know that these positions are very dangerous for black. If white gets d4, bishop e3, queen d2, knight f5 as indicated, the bishop takes h6, sacrifice will be looming in the air. It can turn out to be very nasty for black. Fabi in great shape.
Unpleasant position for Ray, and I think it's so cool that you look at this from typical, normal Italian position, nothing's going on. You look at it a little bit more carefully, you realize that the typical idea d5 is not possible in the version that black wants to play it in. You realize that white has a very clear plan of improving his position, d4, knight f5, and you start to understand why Ray is spending as much time as he is. It's move 13, he's already down to 49 minutes, and he's got major problems to solve. I think this is a big turning point in this game. Can Ray figure out a decent setup here to prevent the expansion in the center and the accumulation of Fabi's pieces on the king side? But really, really encouraging news for Fabi fans in the early going of this game, Peter.
Yes, and I think it's a very instructive position after move 8. Can you just bring that position back? Because this is about all these small finesses, and I feel like after the move knight bd2, black should have never wasted the tempo on h6, because the reason why you usually play the move h6 is to stop any kind of bishop g5s at an early stage. But white has committed the knight to d2 early. There is simply no reason to hurry with that. Instead, he could have castled first. And also, often when you castle, then white has to watch out for knight f1, knight g4. It's a very typical idea that knight f1, knight g4 bothers white, kind of. I don't know exactly if in this position it's a big issue or not, with ideas king h8, f5. So often, in such situation after castle, white would have himself spend the tempo on h3. And then black can start bringing his knight, knight e7, knight g6, save that tempo on h6, and we might have gotten the same position as in the game with one tempo up for black, which could make a big difference.
One tempo up and no hook on h6. We mentioned those bishop takes h6 ideas if we go back to the live board. Those are not as remote as they may appear. I mean, after knight f5, you already have to calculate ideas of bishop takes h6 and then queen d2, queen takes h6. So that was a very instructive insight, Peter, how one innocuous looking move that you seem to always play can be played at the wrong moment and can cause the position to become very unpleasant. Well, we will leave Mr. Robson to his devices here. We've gotten, obviously, a lot of requests from the chat to look at various games. We haven't shown the Arjun Eric Geisy game just yet. We can return to the Magnus game. We've had a couple of moves there. But can we look quickly at the Eric Geisy Sindarov game, which is in a fascinating open Rui?
Of course, yeah, let's go for it. This is also a very fashionable line, a very risky line from the black side. Actually, the point is that the main idea of playing this line from the black side is trying to be as solid as possible. But the paradox is, by trying to be solid, things are escalating, because if white wants to challenge this variation in the open Spanish, in the open rule Lopez, then he has to go for ultra sharp play, and this is exactly what Arjun is doing. He seems to be perfectly prepared. We did see Sindarov in his previous game against MVL using the bishop c5 Alhangias variation in the Spanish. Yeah, so he's jumping. Arjun was definitely ready for that one. He's also ready for this. I think that, and looking at the clock situation, Black has spent time. He does not signal the confidence that I know everything. For example, Shakriar Mamedyarov is, I think, one of the leading experts of this line with Black. And if you don't know everything, then it's a very risky position to be in with Black.
For sure, and I had this very recently in a rapid game against Shock, and there's a lot of forced draws in this line. But obviously, we're going down a different path here. Now, when you look at this for the first time, a big impression is made by this pawn on t3. And I think you'd be forgiven for thinking that Black has the upper hand. There's this beast of a pawn, but that pawn is also a serious weakness, and it can be targeted, I think, in two main ways. The first is that White can play the very natural move rook e3. And I think this is a serious candidate move because you're already threatening bishop takes d3. If Black brings the queen to d7, well, now there is this other way of attacking the pawn. Rather than attacking it directly, you can also try to eliminate the defender of the pawn, the bishop on g6, by swinging your knight to the side, knight h4. Obviously threatening knight takes g6. And if you can force Black, Peter, I think you can confirm this insight. If you can force Black to give away his dark squared bishop, then just generally the coordination is ruined, but more specifically, the rook is hanging. And if you move the rook to e8, White can take on d3 immediately, but White can even throw in the move f4, and the situation for Black is incredibly critical because f5 is threatened, bishop takes d3 is also unstoppable, and Black is already borderline lost in this situation. So does Black have a satisfactory answer to the move rook e3? I know Mamedyarov very often plays this move a5, which is a little bit mysterious to me, but maybe Black has to see counterplay on the queen side in order to counterbalance White's play on the king side and in the center.
Yes, exactly. I mean, basically, a6, a5 is the key idea from Black side, breaking that structure. And if b takes a5 happens, then after knight takes a5, the possibility of knight c4 jump is coming. So White usually tries everything to be ready for this a5 move. I mean, also after a5, knight h4 is a critical move. However, the big question, if you already know that it's not about the pawn on d3, then the question can appear, what happens if White instantly goes for knight h4, not wasting any time on dealing with the d3 pawn? You did show this wonderful line that after takes, or I mean the trade on h4, White opens up this f pawn as well, which can be a very serious and powerful tool, yeah, by going f4, f5, tapping that bishop on g6.
And Black has to walk the tightrope here because this almost seems forced. If you give up the light squared bishop and you lose the pawn, you likely lose the game. And then the question is, well, where do you go with your rook? There is the tempting d2, but that just runs into rook e2. I don't like the look of that. You might have to make a brazen move like rook d5 to try to seek complications in the endgame. If you play the move rook d7, White doesn't have to hurry with attacking the pawn. White can surround it, besiege it with the move queen d2. And Black's well of ideas is drying up. White's is only beginning. White's just going to run this f-pawn up the board. You can invent a million scenarios here, Peter, where Black is essentially losing within a couple of moves. I feel, and the engine does confirm this, that Black's position after knight h4 is critical.
Yes, and it feels critical. I somehow have the feeling that Black has mixed up the move order, which is a very dangerous thing to do in this specific line. I mean, if you play this line, you better know everything, because even if you know everything, it's still dangerous. But if you don't know everything, then you just can end up getting under serious pressure. And this is, I think, what we are witnessing here.
It is indeed. And we will see if Arjun Erigaisi finds this knight h4 move. It is not yet on the board, but he's got plenty of time with which to work. Okay. So we can swing back to one of our top matchups. We have some developments in the CARLSON KEYMER game. But if there is another game that you wanted to visit, Peter, I'm happy to do that as well. But my eyes are really drawn to the position in CARLSON's game, which continues to heat up.
Yeah, okay, let's go back there. And after we will jump to Gukesh Yesipenko, because that's
Perfect.
also an incredible match. So what? Yeah, the move knight d4 to e2 was played by Magnus.
Great call, Peter. Queen e7, you pointed out that that was a possibility. And indeed, he insists on long castle. We remind you, folks, the point of 92 was to take the sting out of the capture on c3, which otherwise would have led to these nasty tactics for white. Vincent deploying his rook, Magnus solidifying his pawn. And the last move, queen e7 to e5, unpinning the queen and putting the queen on a commanding post in the center from which it can trampoline with ease to the queen side.
Yes, I think that black has made all the natural moves. Yeah, getting out of the pin. Every piece is ready. The big question is what happens next. Yeah, because white has, for example, some ideas of trying to push the g pawn, which is a very typical idea in this type of positions, and knowing that Magnus is in a must-win situation, g4 might look like a main candidate move. Also getting ready for some bishop g3, h4 ideas afterwards in order to prepare g4, g5. However, the big question is that is actually black now maybe threatening to open up the center with d6, d5? Is that break a threat or not? Because that's one of those very difficult questions to get the answer to. I'm expecting Carlsen to spend quite a lot of time understanding this.
Carlsen has to plunge in and get his hands dirty here because, I mean, just imagine trying to assess the complications. It's unimaginable. g4, d5, I mean, do you take on d5? Who knows? There's knight takes d5. Incredibly hard to calculate. You can also play the move bishop to g3 to chase the queen out of the center, and then it would be Vincent's turn to make a very difficult decision, going back to e7, checking on g5, then there's intermezzos with d takes e4. My head is exploding, and we haven't even started looking at this position. Imagine sitting there and trying to assess whether d5 is a concrete idea or not. The other thing I would point out, I think newer players might be tempted by the move f4. And this move kind of gives you a rush. Oh, it's a one-move threat. I'm attacking the queen. But it seriously weakens the e4 pawn. And remember that Magnus has just played the move f3, so this would defeat the purpose. Vincent can drop the queen back to e6. And if Magnus continues to attack, the queen deftly slides into g4. And a very important detail, were the king on b1 here, this line would work for white. This is what it all boils down to, folks, in high-level chess. The placement of the king on c1 rather than b1, because here, black has the intermezzo, queen takes f4 check, and he preserves the integrity of his kingside pawn structure as well as an extra pawn. So direct confrontation here seems to be out of the question. Magnus has to approach this in more subtle a manner, and we will see, Peter, if he finds g4. But definitely such a juicy, complex game as we see Vincent pondering his move. Okay, it is time for us to take another quick break, folks. We know you're excited to see the Gukesh game. We promise we will bring you action from Gukesh's match as well as from Hikaru's game, where he spent 37 minutes to capture on g4. Stick with us, folks. We will be back with more World Cup in just a couple of minutes.
This course is about white playing d4, all the tools you need to get an advantage with white and not be tricked early in the opening. Now, it has a really long, complicated name that I'm going to mispronounce now, so you can make fun of me. Okay, don't make fun of me too much. I'm trying to help you here. It's called the Chelyabinsk variation, and I'm probably mispronouncing Chelyabinsk. That's why I call it the A6 Slav.
This August, engage in a battle of epic proportions against some of the most bodacious artists history hath ever seen. Behold, Raphael, the prince of painters, doth seek a fresh apprentice. Dost thou possess the prowess to impress him? Michelangelo, a true Renaissance man, painter, sculptor, architect, and poet, doth possess a myriad of artistic talents. Yet, one wonders, can his creative genius translate to brilliance upon the board of chess? Prepare thyself for a game as dramatic as the Baroque paintings of Artemisia Gentileschi, one of the most expressive artists of the 1600s. A renowned sculptor, Donatello stands tall as one of the most important artists of the early Renaissance. His unique blend of creativity, aesthetics, adaptability, and patience maketh him a challenging foe. Lo, Leonardo da Vinci, known for his artistic talents, scientific curiosity, and innovative ideas, is the very embodiment of the Renaissance. He is not only among the greatest artists to ever live, but also one of the greatest thinkers. May fortune smile upon thee. Create thy masterpiece on chess.com. Cowabunga!
Welcome back to the 2023 Fide World Cup. This is the second and decisive match game of the fourth round, where so many players have to win to avoid elimination. And that group of players includes Magnus Carlsen, who faces the German phenom Vincent KEYMER. And we have a huge moment here. Magnus has made his decision, and it is not the correct one. He's played the move a3, Peter, and shockingly, there is an incredible tactic that Vincent KEYMER has at his disposal, and this tactic will give Black fantastic chances of, at the very least, holding the position. Take it away.
Well, it's a very huge moment. Magnus spent something like 25 minutes on his move a3, yeah? So he believes that it's a very nice stabilizing move. It kind of forces Black to make up his mind. Black has the pair of bishops, so one could argue that giving up that bishop is not such a great choice, but Black has to capture on c3, and now it's already the big question if White cannot recapture with the knight on c3 because of queen f4 check, winning the bishop. Yeah, that's the first tactical motive that one has to keep an eye on. Of course, this is very easy. Nobody blunders this. So the big question is, what happens next? So queen takes c3. Is Magnus, first of all, going for an endgame, and he believes that in this endgame he can hope for something? That's already, I'm not entirely sure about. But according to computer, there's this stunning tactics with knight f6 takes e4. I mean, unbelievable tactics. Very, very strange motive. I have never seen it in my life. And look at this. If queen takes e5, rook e5, fe4, rook takes e4 is a double attack on the bishop on h4 and on the knight on e2.
God.
So this is not possible for White. So I'm believing that after knight takes e4, f takes e4 is kind of the critical question. But even then, queen takes e4 attacks both the bishop on h4 and the knight on e2.
Oh my God.
And
this is a disaster. This is a disaster for Magnus. And the worst thing, Peter, LPDO, loose pieces drop off, but he cannot protect both minor pieces at the same time. You don't have knight f4, and because the knight is on a light square, you can't move the bishop and protect the knight. Holy smokes, this
but
is a
Vincent
huge
is
moment.
about to move, and he takes it. Takes on c3, yes. He takes on c3. And look at Magnus, he looks aside. It clearly indicates that he has noticed knight takes e4, but it was so tempting for Vincent. He thinks like, draw is enough. I trade the queens. What can happen to me? It's a very solid position. But Magnus cannot believe look at this. He's just completely shocked of what happened.
Oh my gosh, a huge miss by Vincent, but let's not overstate the case. He's got fantastic chances of holding that endgame, but my goodness, knight takes e4 would have likely sent him into the next round. So easy to miss against anybody, but particularly from a nothing position out of the clear blue sky. A tactic like this is exceedingly hard to see. So definitely understandable. Vincent playing the move quickly. And I wonder if Magnus's reaction maybe tipped him off to the fact that something existed. And we hope for Vincent's sake that the answer is no, because it's much harder to play with the prior knowledge that you missed something juicy earlier in the game.
Yes, I mean, basically he believed Magnus. Yeah, if he would have not believed Magnus, maybe he would have spotted the move knight takes e4. He just believed that, okay, I'm behind on the clock, I can trade queens, what's the big issue? But once he saw Magnus's reaction, it's kind of almost sure that it hit him that, hang on, I was just one move away from sensation with knight takes e4. And also I felt like Magnus's reaction indicated that, oh my God, I was one move away from elimination. And now if the game continues, this is like a bonus. And from this, Magnus can get a lot of strength.
Insane moment. I'm still, man, I'm shocked because it was during the break that we saw the move a3 and we were analyzing it, and knight takes e4 is such an incredible tactical shot. But again, we're over it. This is the position on the board. I think Vincent is very likely to move this knight back to h7. He could also play knight h5, but knight h7 seems to offer the knight more prospect of redeploying later in the game, perhaps through f8 and g6. Now, it's hard to get a grasp on whether white is slightly better or if it's equal. Visually, black's pawn structure is very ugly, Peter, but it's like a bumper on a car. It's not meant to be pretty, but it is very hard to attack black's construction because the bishop is guarding c6, the pawn on a6 is virtually unreachable, and at the right moment, of course, black can push c5, for instance, in response to rook d4. What do you make of Magnus's realistic chances to squeeze out a win in this endgame?
Well, when Magnus played the move a3, and I haven't yet spotted the move knight takes d4, I exactly had this position in my mind, and I was thinking like, I don't exactly understand why Magnus felt the need from a double H position to turn it into an endgame, which, yes, maybe tiny bit better. By the way, also black might be threatening to go f7, f5, breaking the construction, but it's a very typical idea. And to my eyes, the move G to G4, which the computer is not even mentioning, looks like the most natural way, and I believe that it will be the move Magnus will play. He has to kind of stop f7, f5. He wants to lock the position, then get the bishop back to g3, probably expand on the king side with h4, and try to combine, play on the king side, play on the queen side, and also eventually in the center if black is focusing on the flanks. So it's difficult to understand how much it is, but there is some long-term prospects for white. And G4 on the board.
Yeah, you got to stop F5 just to keep as much meat on the bone as possible. G4 on the board, and Vincent will continue to try to solidify his position, perhaps with the move F6 to build some spikes to just make sure that white's kingside pressure is not as easily achievable. But finally, the smoke has cleared. Magnus has dodged a massive bullet. His time in Baku would have ended after knight takes e4, and instead Vincent will have to hold this endgame, presumably for a very long time, as we see Magnus getting up from the board there. As Vincent ponders his next move, we wanted to remind you of a couple important things. First and foremost, we wanted to remind you that you shouldn't miss your chance to win Diamond membership this Friday. The Chess.com Discord server is hosting an arena with 4 Diamond memberships up for grabs. To stake your claim, join the Chess.com Discord at go.chess.com/Discord and connect your Discord to your Chess.com account. Use !Discord in chat now for more. That's !Discord. And now the second thing, for people who are just joining us or maybe less experienced with the way that the World Cup cycle works, we wanted to remind you of what's at stake here and what the path looks like to the World Championship, who in fact will challenge newly minted World Champion Ding Liren. Will it be Jan Nepomniachtchi, who is automatically through to the candidates because he played in the previous match? Or will it be one of the 3 World Cup finishers who qualifies into the candidates, one of the 2 top finishers in the FIDE Grand Swiss in Isle of Man, or the top-rated player? So lots of ways to qualify, Peter, for the World Championship, but all of them are exceedingly difficult.
Yes, very difficult. And there was this interview with Wesley, and Wesley mentioned that because he's not playing the Grand Swiss, he decided not to play. He felt tremendous pressure playing here at the World Cup, because it's essentially his only and last chance of qualifying for the candidates. And he stated that if he is nervous, usually he doesn't perform so well. And this is exactly what we have seen. I don't know, maybe he should have considered then playing the Grand Swiss, just psychologically giving him some kind of a safety net that yes, even if I don't qualify from the World Cup, I will still have the Grand Swiss. It just shows that how much pressure the top players are feeling, how much it means for them to be part of the candidates.
And one of the players who I think almost all of us would like to see in the candidates is Gukesh, who has had an incredible chess journey. He continues to improve. He's currently second in line to qualify by rating after Anish Giri. He has a rating that, just really pops out at you, 2751. As Gukesh continues to climb the ladder and he crosses the 2750 threshold. He has a difficult match against Andrei Yasipenko, who himself has defeated Magnus Carlsen before. He's been over 2700, and their first game ended in a draw. I think, given what I'm seeing here, that they are very likely to go into the tie breaks.
Yeah, there's a tiny bit of an edge for white, but this is a very solid line, so it's obvious that Yasipenko did not want to take any risk against Gukesh. I do recall commenting the Tata Steel tournament from Vikings in 2021, and at that moment the very young Yasipenko finished on shared second place with a +3 score, stunning result. He even had chances of winning the tournament, and at that point everybody was expecting him to enter the top 10, and instead of this, in the last couple of years, he didn't make that steady progress as people were expecting. And instead now Gukesh is the one. However, I believe that he's super motivated to prove that it's just a matter of time before he again makes a big jump.
Absolutely. And he has been making those advances. Of course, his opponent, Andrei Yasipenko, conversely, has been struggling. He's been in a very rough patch in his chess career, dropping below 2,700. But obviously, Andre is incredibly young. He's very talented, and we shouldn't put too much stock into a player's rating when they still have so much growing to do and so much in their future. Now, you mentioned that white is a tiny bit better. I would imagine that this is because the bishop is a little bit better than the knight, and there is this small target of the c7 pawn, which Gukesh defended with his previous move, rook b7. Is there a case to be made for the move c5? I would assume the answer is no, because that would give black this juicy outpost for the knight on d5.
Yes, exactly. Of course, this also leads us to a position which is typical, that if you get a monster knight on d5, white might get a monster bishop on d6. However, with black's rook already on b7, yeah, that if that black rook would somewhere on the 8th rank, then one could make this argument that, okay, the control of the b file might be very important, but with the rook on b7, I don't feel that this is of an issue. The knight on d5 blocks everything, every entry square, so I'm not seeing white advancing that pawn to c5.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm not seeing this game ending in any result other than a draw. Perhaps I could try the move rook fe1, something a little bit less committal, but this is just a very sterile position, and I feel like top GMs almost, especially in the modern day, no matter their age, just almost never mess up positions like this. Unless, you're facing Magnus in an endgame. That's different, but I think this one's likely to end in peace.
Yes, it looks peaceful, which gives us a chance to move on. Maybe let's take a look at Santos Latasa. Can he bounce back against Grandelius? Yeah, because he's a must-win situation.
Okay, let's take a look. Jaime Santos Latasa, one of Spain's most exciting young talents. He got soundly outplayed yesterday, and today he essayed the London system, trying to dodge mainstream theory against his very well-prepared opponent. And this is the current position. Grandelius' last move, striking at the queen side with a5 and trying to induce the move b5, which would not only deprive the bishop of the b5 square itself, but I think give black a very nice blockading square for his other knight on b6 and fix this long-term weakness on a4. So Jaime should not just blindly push b5, but if you're not playing b5, well, what are you doing? Perhaps bishop b5 deserves attention?
Yes, I also feel like Niels has probably more or less equalized. I mean, especially knowing the match situation that white needs to win, I believe black is the one who is more happy with the current situation. Black has a very solid position. There is not so much dynamic. I almost feel like black has just some 1-2 little tiny questions to answer, and if he does that, he should have all the reasons to believe that he will make an easy draw. The next white move, I believe, is very critical, because the big question is, you stated beautifully that b4, b5 is an absolutely no-go. You cannot lock the position on the queen side and give black access to that lovely b6 square. The big question is, do you go bishop b5 immediately, but then maybe black has a chance to trade his bishop from h5 on f3, and I'm not sure that you want to let that happen.
Yeah, knight takes f3, and even a simple move like rook ec8, and where is white's winning chances going to come from here? Because b takes a5, black has the very calm move rook to a8, then recapture on a5, and you're chilling. So I think what you're implying, Peter, is that white should probably consider throwing in the move g2, g4, sending that bishop away, and maybe then playing bishop to b5, but that's kind of a difficult sequence to come up with, and even after bishop b5, black can still play rook ec8. It does feel, though, that that is a much improved version over the immediate bishop b5.
Yes, I just feel that this is the only chance for white, and it's a very important moment. If white is not using this opportunity, then we'll get absolutely zero chances. I'm not even sure how much chances he gets after g4, bishop b5, but he has to do that.
Yeah, this is going to be a tightrope that Jaime Santos Latasa has to walk, maybe trying to exploit black's clock, although Niels handled his time pressure beautifully yesterday. Now we have an exciting piece of news. There are some updates in the Hikaru game, but one game in which the transmission has been fixed, we've gotten confirmation of that, is Nepo against Nihal Sarin. And the world champion challenger might be in a serious amount of trouble. Let's go to that game and check out their fascinating opposite colored bishop middle game, where it seems like Nepo has been kind of progressively losing the thread of the game. He is up a lot of time. He's got an hour to Nihal's 30 minutes. But from first impressions, looks like White's got a very stable positional advantage here, Peter.
Yeah, with this pawn structure e2, f3, and the bishop on f2. Yeah, this is basically the key construction. It's an opposite colored bishop position. Black's pawn structure is damaged. The a7, c7 pawns are very vulnerable. And in this case, black always relies on the light squares compensation. But these pawns e2, f3 take the light squares perfectly under control. The white king is safe. And the big question is, now that those loose pawns are there, and white has options like going queen a5 or queen a3 as tempting options, how does black stabilize the position?
Yeah, you mentioned the word vulnerable. I think that is really the key word, because not only are you struggling in the long run positionally, you're struggling in the short run just to keep your minor pieces afloat. And to that end, I would be tempted, really tempted by the move queen a3. This looks very pretty because you're pinning the knight. By extension, you're applying pressure on the bishop. You're creating possibilities of the knight jumping out to e5. And I think it could be very easy for black to lose control of the game here. My inclination with black would be to play the move rook fe8 to protect the queen. But the computer doesn't see the need to do that because the knight could, in fact, drop back to d5. If black does that immediately, though, and tries to force the queens off the board, he will pay the price. Knight will jump into e5. The bishop is suddenly under fire, and you can't defend it with rook b6 because of d5, opening up a discovered attack on the rook. So you're going to end up losing all of your pawns on the queen side. But black doesn't have to play knight d5 immediately. Black could bring the rook into the game, and in response to knight e5, tuck the bishop away on e8 when it seems like black has managed to reach a decent setup for his pieces. But even here, white could gobble the pawn on a7 and just say, hey, I'm up a healthy extra pawn. I've got a positional advantage. And this is just one of many paths that Nihal Sarin could take. He could drop his queen all the way back to d1. You pointed out the move queen a5 to aim at c7. But Peter, it's very easy in this situation to get sucked in to the perfectionism of trying to find the best square. And as good of a blitz player as Nihal Sarin is, he does have 26 minutes and he will have to make a decision quickly here.
Exactly. I mean, we know that Jan is a very practical player. He's trying to use every chance of creating counterplay, and you definitely don't want to. And Queen A3 played, yeah, it's clearly the best move. You don't want to be in a time trouble against Jan, yeah, because you know that you will need time to navigate the tricky ideas that Jan will pull up, no matter what's the objective evaluation of the position.
Okay, so now big decision here for Jan. We were talking about deploying the rook to d8. What would be your instinct here in terms of setting up the barricades, the defensive barricades with black?
Yeah, well, I think this is the main problem that black is facing, that the intuition doesn't help so much. I mean, it's obvious what white wants to do, but how to deal with this? Maybe, I mean, I would like to move that bishop from c6. I mean, that bishop on c6 is doing nothing. And maybe if I have the chance to put that on b5, because I also believe that Jan has removed his rook. The rook was probably on b5. He just fall back with the rook to b8, opening that b5 square, and at least targeting the e2 pawn. On the other hand, I'm not exactly sure how much I'm achieving, but I think I have to try it.
Yeah, it creates some tension, and it's very hard for white to nicely address this knight on b4. Of course, I think the straightforward move is rook a to b1, asking black politely, or not so politely, what he wants to do with the knight. And in the event of knight d5, I think Nihal, given his time situation, might be tempted by the prospect of just trading queens and then playing a calm move like e2, e4, taking the pawn out of the purview of black's bishop and claiming that he's playing for two results. Now, at the same time, maybe this is not the most that Nihal could squeeze out of the position. The engine is always so sleek in these types of situations, and it's proposing this move bishop e1 that I think is just a very hard move to even locate, much less to appreciate how it is different from rook a to b1. But I think that if bishop b5 happens, we are likely to see some sort of a transition to an endgame where Nihal will do his best to convert a serious advantage.
Yes, it's a serious advantage. It's a very dangerous spot for Jan to be in because it's the second game. Yeah, if something goes wrong, and it already went wrong, if it does not end well, let's put it that way, then he's also eliminated from the World Cup. So much at stake, and he needs to dig very deep into it in order to hold this position.
And as fast as we see Jan play normally, this is a spot where he will most likely take a good amount of time. He's got no choice. He has to play accurately here. If the situation gets any worse, then his position will go from very bad to potentially technically lost. Okay, so where to from here? Shall we do a quick update on the Hikaru Prague game?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, off we go to the birthday boys game. Prague turning 18 today and trying to show some excellent chess to knock Hikaru Nakamura out on his birthday. But Hikaru, obviously, will put up a very stern resistance. This is the current position on the board. We should rewind because we had that very interesting analysis, and they did in fact deviate. After rook h1, queen d7, we were focused on the straightforward move f3. But instead, Prague immediately strikes at the center with d3, d4, and Hikaru responds with e4, insisting on keeping the center closed and offering up the pawn on e4. Prague says, I don't need that pawn. I want the center instead, preventing black from expanding with d5. Hikaru keeps the center locked up, and this is the current position, both sides, down below 45 minutes.
Yeah, and it's still a very sharp position. How do we evaluate? I mean, it's kind of natural to play something like h3. Yeah? We would love to open up the g5. We want to get access to the g7 pawn before black stabilizes the position. I don't feel like, especially Prague, haven't captured the pawn on e4 move earlier. So I believe that the move h3 looks like the most natural option.
Yeah, and some people in the chat, Peter, were asking why not knight takes e4 immediately. Well, there could be a couple potential reasons, but actually he might have been worried about dropping this pawn on e2, which doesn't seem like a significant pawn, but Hikaru could grab it and return to h5, and we should not forget that black still is within his rights to castle queenside and get out of the center. But we have a move, and Prague has indeed captured the pawn on c5 in this version, having included the moves d5 and c5. So the big question, what impact does it have on the position, Peter? And is bishop takes e2 still possible? I think the answer is no, because of some really pretty tactics with the knight capturing on c5.
Exactly, yeah. That was the whole point behind getting d5, c5s in. Let's just show these beautiful tactics. Yeah, bishop takes e2, rook de1, bishop h5 is met by knight takes e5.
Wow. Takes, and the bishop on e7 is helpless. You have to castle. White will take on e7 and be 2 pawns up and have a winning position, also due to the massive attack down the g file, because black will have to castle kingside here. So that's out of the question. Hikaru doesn't spend any time thinking about it, and instead, he does make a bishop move, but he drops it back to f5, which I think was by far the most logical move, takes the bishop out of the pin, and does so with tempo.
Yes, and this was the reason why I was somehow believing that h3 move was more in Prague's radar, because I don't know exactly how to react after bishop f5. I don't like the move knight g3 because it blocks my rook. I don't really want to put that knight back on c3, but then where do I put this knight? And after getting rid of this e4 pawn, it will mean that the pawn on g7 stays alive, which gives quite a lot of long-term stability for black's position.
It feels like Prague had the initiative, and his initiative has lost its luster. I don't want to say that Hikaru is taking over the game, because from an objective perspective, that's probably not true. But it seems like at the very least, Hikaru feels a lot more comfortable here. Maybe there's a case to be made for the move f3, and this has to be assessed very carefully by Prague. If Hikaru takes on e4 and plays the move bishop f6, he's got this big-time blockade on the dark squares, but Prague could try to contest that blockade with bishop f4, and there's this sleek move, queen b3 to g3 to hit d6 and prepare e5. Probably dynamically equal here, Peter, but a hard position to evaluate.
Yeah, very difficult to evaluate. Yeah, it's... I mean, white has the damaged pawn structure. Just give 2 moves for black and white will be borderline lost, yeah, kind of in long terms. So yes, it all depends on very direct play. And after long castle, I was wondering if does white want to sacrifice this pawn with e4, e5? However, where does this lead? For example, d takes e5, bishop falls back to e3, and yes, we have compensation, but we are also pawn down.
We're a pawn down, and black has a very clear pathway toward consolidating. Bishop e7, bishop d6, and look at, I mean, obviously g7 hangs, so there's some logistical problems, but man, if Hikaru sets these kingside pawns in motion, that would be very, very scary. So white would probably have to keep the flames of the attack going on the queen side. But when you look with the engine, all of this starts to seem self-evident. Of course, you know, white has compensation, there's this pawn, but imagine being in Prague's shoes and playing Hikaru and not knowing if he's got sufficient objective compensation. Furthermore, if he plays the move f3, that means that he has to have calculated to that point, because if you don't play e5 in that position, then black will establish a blockade on e5, and then what you're saying, Peter, comes true. That would be white's absolute worst nightmare. So f3 is a super committal move that would have to be supplemented with very concrete calculation.
Yes, and okay, basically the move knight c3, I don't like, but at the same time it gives some stability, because black's counterplay could be eventually some b7, b5 if the knight goes to g3, and imagine that white wants to expand with f4, bishop moving back to d2 and then e4, so on. Black will clearly go for a very quick counterplay with b5. If we get that knight back to c3, then we are controlling the b5 a bit better, but I'm always a big fan of the two bishops, and if the position slows down, yes, if white gets e4, f4 and everything in, then it's gonna be fine, but I do believe that black has a lot of resources and black has nothing really to worry about.
And time pressure is going to be very likely in this game. We're only on move 17, Prague down to 33 minutes, and the next 10 moves are not going to be any less complex than the first 15. So definitely Prague has to keep an eye on his clock, but first and foremost, he knows that this is a crucial decision, and where he brings his knight or whether he moves it will have a direct bearing on the subsequent impact of the game. So he's investing a good chunk of time here to figure out the course, the direction that he wants to take his knight in, and by extension, the direction that he wants to take the game in. But I'll be honest, Peter, I'm worried. I'm worried intuitively for Prague in this position. It feels like Hikaru, maybe taking over is the wrong word, as I was saying earlier, but feels a little bit more comfortable than he did just a couple of moves ago.
Yes, I also feel like that line when the pawn on g7 got eliminated was somehow more fearful for black in the long terms, and there was this time we analyzed that does the white rook get trapped or not. Probably it was just impossible for Prague to really work it out over the board. He felt like this d4 was a very serious and nice candidate move, and that's why he opted for it. I would like to mention just one sequence of moves that after the move knight c3, the computer says that g7, g5 is an interesting move, and my heart was also actually signaling me that I probably would maybe like to play g5 in order to get ready for white's expansioning ideas with falling back with the bishop to d2 and pushing e4, f4. And after g5, I feel that I have long-term stability. I don't have to worry about white advancing his pawns, and black should be somehow solid enough to have equality.
And maybe white should proceed with that plan of expansion, right? Bishop d2, and then e4 and
long
f4.
Castles.
Yeah, long castles, and e4, bishop drops back. And
yes,
okay,
f4,
f4
probably.
Yep.
Yes, g takes f4, bishop f4, and yeah, this was the position where I was thinking like maybe bishop g5, exactly. Yeah, bishop g5 was my key idea.
Wow, opening up the rook, and suddenly the h2 pawn is under fire. That pawn thought it had a nice courtside seat to the action, but no, it's directly involved. And Prague has made his decision as we're analyzing, and he has gone the other direction. He has played knight e4 back to g3.
Wow.
And,
okay.
Big decision.
This guarantees us, yes, this guarantees us a very double-edged and sharp continuation of this game, because it's clear that white wants to go all in the center, and black will not have this possibility like before with g5 to get stability. We'll have to go with the flow and create his counterplay on the queen side.
Indeed, and now Hikaru will have to figure out where to bring that bishop. He's got bishop g6 and bishop h7, but I think we're likely to see bishop h7, just because bishop g6 would run into an eventual f4, f5 with tempo. These are the kinds of long-term decisions that both players have to make here that will dictate the subsequent course of the game. But I think we will leave Hikaru as he makes his way back to the board to his own devices and keep a close eye on this game. We will have plenty of action in the Hikaru game as we go forward. A couple of updates. Of course, we know that Sanal drew Ivanchuk, so that's going to tiebreak. Abasev and Svidler have also drawn their game or are about to draw their game. That match will also go to a tiebreaker. We remind you that Alexei Sarana has dispatched Wesley So by holding a draw. Rasmus Svane and Wing Hao have made a quick draw as well, so they are also going into the tiebreaker. So not a surprise, Peter, just because of how evenly matched so many of these mini matches are.
Yes, then maybe we should get a quick update on Maxodlu versus Duda, because Parham is known to be very aggressive. What do we have here? Some advantage for White.
For sure. And a big time advantage as well. But that's less important. We're at move 30. Okay.
Yes. Yes. Okay. It's some torture time. On the other hand, Black has some counterplay with d3, opening up the d file, getting access to the d4 square for the bishop in long terms. I do believe that if White is not able to punish the move d3 immediately, and I don't see how, then in fact it's very good news for Black. It might just lead to liquidation.
So this is definitely, you're saying, what JKD is calculating. Okay, let's make the move on the board. White.
Yes. Because you have rook f4. You have rook f4 threat here after CD rook d3.
CD, rook d3, rook f4. Oh, and if you move the bishop, let me just show that rook e7 check. Suddenly, this knight jumps out to h6, and it's a checkmate on f8. The bishop is under fire from 3 different sources, but there's a crazy tactic here. Rook d3 lifts up to d4. What a crazy cold-blooded resource. And somehow, Black holds his own. If rook e takes f6, these are just mind-expanding complications. If rook f6, rook g4, if knight f6, rook takes f4, and White actually loses, you can try to escape, but the king pursues the knight and will take the knight because White has to burn a tempo on recapturing the rook. So, Peter, if Duda is to play d3, that means he has to have seen rook d4, and this is far from a trivial move.
Yes, and also it's still you need to evaluate that pawn endgame after rook e6 to f6, rook f6, rook takes d4, c takes d4, knight takes f6, king f6, and it brings me the memories from yesterday. White plays the move f3, gets the king to d3, and we are very close to seeing that Elina Roberts Harika kings and pawn endgame.
That's a great comparison, and with little time on the clock, I would be very reluctant to go for this with Black. Whether I go for this with Black is determined by the alternatives to d3. If Jan Krzysztof sees something else that appeals to him and he feels that he has realistic chances, he will go for it. In terms of moves like that, Peter, I'm thinking maybe rook d7, although for some reason the computer disapproves of that move in the strongest terms. Maybe it's still rook f4, maybe rook f7. But the impulse, of course, is to play d3 because you're in such a bind that if you can make this move work, then you really, really want to play it because you might not have another opportunity.
Yeah, and the last move from White was in fact the move rook 1 to e4, signaling that White is going for the rook f4 idea.
Indeed. So we might see something more passive like rook f7 to try to keep the status quo. It is not a question of whether Duda is calculating d3. It is very clear that he is.
But hang on, rook f7, rook f4, you might run into bishop e7, rook take g6 tactics. So be careful. How do you make that work?
Oh my gosh. Oh, this is nasty. Let me just show this on the board. And actually, bishop g5 doesn't matter. Wherever the bishop goes, bang. And this wins the game on the spot. Not only does Black lose a pawn, but Black loses everything else as well. You can't even go back to g7. This is a complete disaster. And yeah, I don't see a move after rook f4.
Yes.
Black has to give up the pawn.
Exactly. We see that computer says d3, c takes d3, bishop c3, and apparently, or bishop b2, whatever, just move the bishop away. but these are all very difficult and complex decisions, and we know exactly that it's already again the second game. One single mistake can cost the World Cup for each of these players. Jan Krzysztof Duda under serious pressure.
Indeed, and if you're not seeing and you can't make d3 work here, imagine trying to find it after rook f4 when your eyes are fixed on this bishop. 17 minutes now for the Polish Grandmaster, and it's not an exaggeration to say that he is in a fair bit of trouble. He will need to demonstrate filigree defensive precision in this endgame in order to pull out the draw and force the tiebreaks. Okay, we've got obviously many updates on some of the other boards. The Magnus Carlsen game hasn't changed all that much. They're still in that opposite colored bishop endgame. So we can maybe revisit the Berkish Panamariev game or the Fabiano Caruana game. Which one would you prefer? Or
Well,
something else?
actually, we still haven't looked at Dominguez against Wojtaszek, and
All right.
I believe that this is also a clash of giants.
Absolutely. Let's pay our respects to these two titans of Super Grandmaster chess. We have what seems like a pretty mainstream Ruy Lopez position. Black has entrenched a knight on c4 and uses the pressure on the e4 pawn in order to indirectly defend that knight.
Yes, I mean, basically, if 10 years ago you would have told me that a game between Lenier Dominguez and Radoslav Wojtaszek will feature Ruy Lopez, I would have said, okay, come on, Lenier is a very big favorite because Lenier is a super big expert with the white side and from the black side as well. And Radek used to be a fantastic expert of the Najdorf. Both actually, Lenier, they had very similar repertoires as well. But the last 5-6 years, Radek has actually made tremendous progress building his e4, e5 repertoire. So by now, I think he feels quite secure here, and he gets a very complex double-edged position, but a very difficult spot and very tricky spot to be in against Lenier, who knows all the ins and outs of this opening.
Preparing for Lenier Dominguez was one of the toughest experiences of my life. I faced him in the U.S. Championship 2 years ago, and I determined that I was going to play e4, e5 because I didn't want to go into the Sicilian, and e5 was my main opening at the time. I started looking at his Ruy Lopez games, and I was just getting progressively more and more horrified at his level of understanding compared to mine. Finally, I decided to play the Schliemann and throw all caution to the wind. In the end, I did get outplayed and swindled a draw, but I never want to face him with the black pieces again. Not that I want to face him in a Najdorf either.
Yes, I understand. Yeah, Lenier is a very nice theoretician with not only the theoretical knowledge, but he has this old school of going very deep into the position.
Yes.
So he knows the strategical ideas. He knows everything about an opening that he plays. Actually, I have worked with him between 2007 and 2010. We were very close friends, and we are, but he's now in the United States. So of course, it's not so easy to keep the contact so closely. He's putting some pressure, but okay, it's still all to play for, and probably we should move on to some other game.
Yeah, this one's very complicated, but likely to liquidate in the center. Engine giving approximate equality, so we will keep an eye and maybe bring you an update when the central liquidation happens. We have an interesting development, I think, in the Caruana game, and Peter Svidler and Ijad Abazov have officially drawn their game, so they are going to the tie breaks. But maybe a quick look at how Ray has tried to resolve the problems that he was experiencing in this Italian. And if we rewind, after bishop c2, he did indeed settle on the top engine move, and he did it after a 30-minute think. c7, c5 was played. Fabi did respond with the principal d4, and I really like what Ray did here. He took on d4,